The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in March of 1882. And when Delilah Morrison read the words that her aunt had died and left her a dress shop in Montrose, Colorado, she knew her life in Philadelphia was about to change forever. She stood on the wooden platform 2 weeks later, her traveling trunk beside her, watching the dust settle from the departing train. The air smelled different here, crisp and thin, carrying scents of sage and pine that her city lungs had never known. The mountains loomed in the distance, their peaks still crowned with snow despite the warming temperatures of spring. She had told herself this would be temporary. Come for the spring, settle her aunt's affairs, sell the dress shop, and return home before summer's heat set in. That was the plan, neat and tidy, just like everything else in her carefully ordered life. Miss Morrison. A weathered man with a salt and pepper beard approached, tipping his hat. "I am Samuel Green, your aunt's lawyer. I have a wagon ready to take you to the shop. My condolences for your loss." Margaret was a fine woman. Delilah nodded, swallowing the grief that still felt raw. Her aunt had been the adventurous one in the family, the woman who had abandoned the constraints of Eastern society to build something of her own out west. Delilah had always admired her from afar, but never imagined following in her footsteps. The town of Montrose sprawled before her as they rode down Main Street, a collection of wooden buildings that seemed to teeter between civilization and wilderness. There was a general store, a bank, a saloon from which piano music already spilled despite the early hour, and there, at the corner of Main and Cedar, stood Morrison's fine dresses and alterations. The sign swung gently in the breeze, the paint still fresh and bright. "She had it repainted just last month," Samuel said quietly. Always took pride in her establishment. The shop was larger than Delilah had expected, with a spacious front room lined with fabrics and a few finished dresses on display. A sewing room occupied the back, and upstairs she discovered a modest but comfortable living quarters that had been her aunt's home. Everything was organized, maintained with care, waiting for someone to continue the work. "There is interest from the Miller family," Samuel explained, rifling through papers in his leather case. "They would pay a fair price for the property and business. You could be back in Philadelphia within the month if you wished." Delilah ran her fingers over a bolt of blue calico, feeling the familiar texture beneath her hands. She had learned to sew from her aunt during childhood summers, before Margaret had moved west. "I will think about it," she said finally. "Give me the spring to sort through everything properly." Samuel nodded and left her alone in the shop. Delilah climbed the stairs to the living quarters and stood at the window, looking out over the town. She could see people moving about their business, horses tied to hitching posts, a dog trotting purposefully down the street. So different from Philadelphia's crowded streets and brick buildings. Here, the sky seemed impossibly vast, and the silence between sounds was something she could actually hear. She unpacked her trunk as the afternoon light slanted golden through the windows. Her dresses, her books, her sewing kit that had been a gift from her mother. Everything she had brought fit easily into the small space, leaving room to spare. She had traveled light because she had planned to leave quickly. The next morning, she woke to knocking at the shop door. She dressed quickly and descended the stairs to find 3 women waiting on the boardwalk outside. "Miss Morrison." "I am Clara Henderson," said a woman with kind eyes and graying hair. "Your aunt did alterations on my wedding dress 20 years ago. These are my friends, Ruth Palmer and Elizabeth Warren. We wanted to welcome you to Montrose and see if you intended to keep the shop open." Delilah hesitated, then opened the door wider. "Please come in. I am still deciding what to do with everything." "The town needs a seamstress," Elizabeth said bluntly. She was younger than the others, with work-roughened hands and a direct manner. The nearest one otherwise is in Gunnison, and that is a full day's ride. Your aunt provided a real service here." They stayed for an hour, telling her stories about Margaret, about the town, about the constant need for mending and alterations, and the occasional new dress for special occasions. By the time they left, Delilah had agreed to remain open through the spring, at least until she made her final decision. Word spread quickly. By the end of the week, she had a steady stream of customers bringing torn shirts, dresses that needed letting out or taking in, curtains that required hemming. She fell into a rhythm, her needle flying through fabric as it always had, finding comfort in the familiar motions. It was on a bright morning in early April when Caleb Rowland first walked through her door. He was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hat was dusty from the trail, and he carried himself with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own body. He held a shirt in his hands, the sleeve torn nearly clean through. "Madam," he said, and his voice was deep, with a hint of roughness that suggested long days shouting over cattle and wind. "I am hoping you can mend this. It is my only good shirt, and I have a meeting at the bank tomorrow." Delilah took the shirt, examining the tear. "This will need more than mending. I will have to piece in new fabric. Do you have a preference for the color?" He looked surprised that she had asked. "Whatever you think best. You are the expert." She quoted him a price and a timeline, and he agreed without haggling. As he turned to leave, he paused at the door. "You are Margaret's niece. I was sorry to hear of her passing. She was always fair in her dealings." "Thank you," Delilah said. "Did you know her well?" "Well enough. I have a ranch about 5 miles north of town. The Broken Creek Ranch. Your aunt altered my Sunday clothes when I needed them and never overcharged a man for honest work." He tipped his hat and left, the door swinging shut behind him. Delilah found herself thinking about him as she worked on the shirt that afternoon. She chose a fabric that matched perfectly, piecing it in so carefully that the repair was nearly invisible. She took more care than was strictly necessary, her stitches small and even, reinforcing the seam so it would hold for years to come. When Caleb returned 2 days later to collect the shirt, his face lit up with genuine surprise. "This is fine work, Miss Morrison. You cannot even tell it was torn." "That is the point of good mending," she said, but she felt pleased by his praise nonetheless. He paid her and added an extra coin for the excellent craftsmanship. "That is not necessary," she protested. "I insist." He smiled at her, and she noticed the way it softened his features, made him look younger than the 30 years she guessed him to be. A job well done deserves proper compensation. After he left, she held the coin in her hand for a long moment before adding it to the cash box. The shop bell rang again, and the day continued, but she found her thoughts drifting back to the rancher with the storm-gray eyes more often than she cared to admit. Spring deepened into the full bloom of late April and early May. The mountains shed their snow, and wildflowers painted the meadows in brilliant colors. Delilah found herself walking through the town in the evenings, exploring the streets and the paths that led to the outskirts where the wild country began. The land called to something in her blood, something she had inherited from her aunt perhaps, a restlessness that the ordered streets of Philadelphia had always suppressed. She saw Caleb occasionally in town, always polite, always ready with a greeting and a tip of his hat. He never lingered, always seemed to be on his way to somewhere else, but their brief encounters began to mark her days in ways she had not anticipated. It was mid-May when he appeared at the shop again, this time with a request that had nothing to do with mending. "Miss Morrison, I apologize for the presumption, but the town is holding a dance next Saturday to celebrate the end of spring planting. I wondered if you might accompany me." Delilah looked up from the hem she was stitching, startled. She had heard about the dance from her customers, had even been encouraged to attend, but she had not planned on going. She was still an outsider here, still planning to leave once the season turned. "I am not sure that would be appropriate," she said carefully. "I barely know you, Mr. Rowland." "Which is precisely why I am asking," he said. "So we might remedy that situation. The entire town will be there. It is all very respectable, I assure you." She studied his face, seeing genuine interest there and something else, a kind of loneliness that matched her own. "I would need to finish Mrs. Henderson's dress first. She is counting on me." "I will take that as a yes," he said, and his smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds. "I will call for you at 7 on Saturday evening." After he left, Delilah sat very still, her sewing forgotten in her lap. She had not expected this, had not planned for the possibility of connection, of attraction, of the way her heart had sped up when he smiled at her. She was supposed to leave after spring. That was the plan. But as she returned to her sewing, she found herself thinking about what she would wear to the dance. Saturday arrived with perfect weather, warm but not hot, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of lilacs from the bushes planted along Main Street. Delilah chose a dress of deep green that brought out the gold in her brown hair, and she took care with her appearance in a way she had not done since arriving in Montrose. Caleb arrived exactly at 7, cleaned up and dressed in dark trousers and a pressed white shirt, his hair still damp from washing. He helped her into his wagon with a gentleness that seemed incongruous with his work-hardened hands, and they rode to the community hall at the edge of town. The building was lit with lanterns hung from the rafters, and music spilled out into the twilight. Inside, it seemed the entire town had gathered, dressed in their finest, ready to celebrate the season's turning. Tables lined one wall, laden with food brought by various families, and a small group of musicians played fiddle and guitar in the corner. Caleb introduced her to people she had not yet met, ranchers and shopkeepers and their families, and everyone welcomed her warmly. She danced with several partners throughout the evening, learning the steps to reels and waltzes, laughing when she stumbled and finding her rhythm again. But it was dancing with Caleb that made her breath catch. He held her with confidence but not presumption, guiding her through the steps with an easy grace that surprised her. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, could smell the clean scent of soap and leather that clung to him. "You dance well," she said as they moved through a waltz. "My mother insisted I learn," he admitted. "She said a man should be civilized in the parlor as well as capable in the saddle." "Is she still living?" A shadow crossed his face. "No, she passed 5 years ago, fever. My father went 2 years before that, thrown from a horse." "I am sorry," Delilah said softly. "Life out here can be hard," he said, "but it can also be beautiful. I have never wanted to be anywhere else." They danced in silence for a moment, and then he said, "What about you? Do you plan to return to Philadelphia?" It was the question she had been avoiding, even in her own thoughts. "That was my intention," she said slowly, "but I find myself less certain than I was when I arrived." "I am glad to hear it," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her look up at him. "Montrose needs people like you, people willing to build something lasting." The dance ended too soon, and other partners claimed her for other songs, but she found herself always aware of where Caleb stood, who he spoke with, when his eyes found hers across the crowded room. He drove her home as the moon rose full and bright, painting the landscape in silver. They talked easily, sharing stories about their childhoods, their families, their dreams. She learned that he had inherited the ranch from his father, that he rang cattle and horses, that he employed 3 steady hands and seasonal workers during roundup and drives. At her door, He hesitated, then said, "I would like to call on you properly, Miss Morrison, if you would allow it." Her heart hammered in her chest. This was not part of the plan. She was supposed to leave. "I am still deciding about the shop," she warned him. "About staying." "I understand," he said, "but perhaps I can give you reasons to consider it more seriously." She smiled despite herself. "Perhaps you can, Mr. Rowland." "Caleb," he said. "Please call me Caleb." "Delilah," she offered in return. He took her hand and bowed over it, his lips barely brushing her knuckles, and the gesture was so courtly, so unexpected that she felt warmth flood through her. "Good night, Delilah." "Good night, Caleb." She watched from her window as he drove away, the wagon disappearing into the moonlit night, and she knew with absolute certainty that her carefully laid plans were unraveling like a poorly stitched seam. May turned into June, and spring gave way to the first warmth of early summer. Caleb called on her twice a week, always proper, always respectful, but with a growing familiarity that spoke of deepening affection. He brought her wildflowers picked from the meadows on his ranch, and once, a book of poetry that had belonged to his mother, its pages worn soft from reading. They went on picnics to places he wanted to show her, high meadows where elk grazed and streams rang cold and clear from mountain snowmelt. He taught her to ride better than her basic eastern seat, showed her how to move with the horse, how to read the land for signs of weather and game and water. She found herself falling in love with the country as much as with the man. The vast skies, the way storms built over the mountains in the afternoons, the endless variations of gold and green and blue that painted the landscape. Philadelphia seemed farther away than miles could measure, a different world entirely, one that no longer quite fit the shape she was becoming. Her customers noticed the change in her, teased her gently about the handsome rancher who came to town more often than his business required. Clara Henderson winked at her when Caleb stopped by the shop just to say hello, and Ruth Palmer asked pointed questions about her intentions. "He is a good man," Elizabeth Warren said one afternoon, bringing in a dress that needed letting out. She was expecting her third child, due in the fall. "Lost his parents young and kept that ranch running through drought and hard winters. He deserves happiness." "I am not sure I am staying," Delilah protested, though the words felt increasingly hollow even to her own ears. "Seems to me you are already here," Elizabeth said with a knowing smile. "The only question is whether you will admit it." June brought the first real heat of summer, and with it, the understanding that spring had definitively ended. Delilah stood in her shop one morning, looking at the calendar on the wall, counting the weeks since her arrival. She had told herself she would leave after spring. Spring was over. The shop bell rang and Caleb entered, his face serious. "Delilah, might I speak with you?" She set aside the shirt she was mending and gestured to the chairs by the window. He sat but seemed unable to settle, his hands restless on his knees. "I know what you said when you arrived," he began. "That you planned to stay only through spring, that you intended to return to Philadelphia." He looked at her directly, his gray eyes intense. "I am asking you not to go," her breath caught. "Caleb, let me finish," he said. "I know I have no right to ask this. We have known each other barely 3 months, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You fit here, Delilah. In this town, in this country, and if you will let me, I would like to show you that you could fit into my life as well." "What are you saying?" she whispered. He stood and paced to the window, looking out at the street. "I am saying that I am in love with you. I am saying that the thought of you leaving tears at me in ways I cannot adequately express. I am saying that I want you to stay through summer, through fall, through every season, for the rest of our lives if you will have me." Delilah rose on unsteady legs and crossed to stand beside him. "This is not what I planned." The best things rarely are, he said, turning to face her. I am not asking you to decide everything today. Just stay through summer. Give us, a chance to see what we might become. She thought of Philadelphia, of the life waiting for her there, predictable and safe. Then she thought of the past 3 months, of wildflowers and mountain vistas, of dancing in lantern light, of the way her heart lifted every time this man walked through her door. I will stay through summer, she said softly, and watched relief wash over his features like rain breaking a drought. He took her hands in his, and the touch sent warmth through her entire body. Thank you, he said simply. That evening, she wrote a letter to her family in Philadelphia, explaining that she needed more time to settle her aunt's affairs, that she would not be returning as soon as planned. It was not quite a lie, but it was not quite the truth either. She was settling something, though it had more to do with her heart than with property and business. Summer unfolded in long, golden days. The work in the shop continued, but Delilah found herself thinking about it differently now, not as a temporary responsibility, but as something that could be her own, a legacy from her aunt that she might choose to continue. Caleb took her to his ranch, and she met his men, weathered cowboys who treated her with respect and poorly concealed curiosity. The ranch house was solid and well-maintained, built by his father from logs cut in the high country. It had a wide porch that looked out over the valley, and she could picture sitting there in the evenings, watching the sun paint the mountains gold and crimson. It needs a woman's touch, Caleb admitted as he showed her through the rooms. I have kept it functional, but I am no decorator. It has good bones, Delilah said, running her hand over the mantel above the stone fireplace. She could already see how it might look with curtains at the windows, rugs on the floors, small touches that would turn it from a house into a home. They spent a Sunday afternoon fishing in Broken Creek, the stream that gave the ranch its name, and she shrieked with laughter when she actually caught a trout, its scales flashing silver in the sunlight. Caleb helped her reel it in, standing close behind her, his hands covering hers on the pole, and she was acutely aware of his warmth, his strength, the way her body seemed to know his presence before her mind acknowledged it. You are a natural, he said, his breath warm against her ear, and she had to remind herself to breathe. They ate the fish for supper, cooked over an open fire as the sun set, and it was the best meal she had ever tasted, flavored with wood smoke and happiness, and the kind of contentment she had never known she was seeking. July brought intense heat and occasional thunderstorms that built over the mountains in towering columns of cloud, before sweeping across the valley with rain and lightning and wind. Delilah grew accustomed to the rhythm of the weather, learned to read the signs that Caleb pointed out, the way the light changed, how the horses grew restless before a storm. One afternoon, caught out on a ride, they took shelter in an abandoned line shack as rain hammered down in sheets. Inside, it was dry and dim, smelling of old wood and dust. They stood close together near the single window, watching the storm rage outside, and Delilah became aware that they were completely alone, miles from town, with nothing but wilderness around them. Caleb seemed to realize it too. He turned to her, his expression serious. Delilah, I need you to know that my intentions toward you are entirely honorable. I want to court you properly with an eye toward marriage if you will have me. Her heart thundered louder than the storm. You are proposing. Not yet, he said with a slight smile. I am stating my intention so there can be no misunderstanding between us. When I propose, you will know it, and you will have a ring, and I will do it properly. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the slight rasp of stubble under her palm. I appreciate your honesty. He caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm, and the intimacy of the gesture made her knees weak. "I want to kiss you," he said quietly, "but I will not unless you tell me it is what you want too." In answer, she rose on her toes and closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to his in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deepening as he pulled her closer. She had been kissed before, chased pecks from suitors in Philadelphia, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the way her entire body seemed to come alive under his touch, for the feeling that she had been waiting her entire life for this moment, this man, this perfect rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I love you, Delilah Morrison. I love you more than I have words to say." "I love you too," she whispered, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that thinking it had not. "I love you, Caleb Rowland." The storm passed, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of sage and rain. They rode back to town slowly, neither wanting the afternoon to end, their hands occasionally brushing as their horses walked side by side. August arrived with its heavy heat, the kind that made even the shadows feel warm. Delilah worked in the shop during the cooler morning hours, then often retreated upstairs during the worst of the afternoon heat. Business was steady, perhaps even better than it had been under her aunt, as word spread of her skill with difficult alterations and her eye for design. Samuel Green visited one afternoon with papers for her to sign, finalizing some last details of her aunt's estate. As she read through them, he said, "The Miller family has renewed their offer for the property if you are still interested in selling. They have even increased the price." Delilah looked around the shop, at the fabrics neatly organized on their shelves, at the dress form standing in the corner wearing a half-finished gown, at the comfortable chairs where customers sat for fittings. She thought of the apartment upstairs, how it had begun to feel like home, how she had started to think of it as hers rather than her aunt's. "Thank you, Samuel, but I am not interested in selling," she said, and the decision felt right, like a door closing on one life and opening onto another. He smiled as if he had expected this answer. "Your aunt would be pleased, I think. She built something good here. I'm glad to see it continue." That evening she told Caleb of her decision. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the mountains, turning the sky into a canvas of orange and pink and gold. "You are staying then?" he asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. "Through summer," she confirmed. "As I promised." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "And after summer," she looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his sun-darkened skin and her paler fingers, at the way they fit together as if designed for exactly this purpose. "I suppose you will have to convince me to stay through fall as well." His laugh was warm and rich. "Is that a challenge, Miss Morrison?" "Perhaps it is, Mr. Rowland." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. Challenge accepted. The last weeks of summer passed in a golden haze. There was a box social at the church where Caleb bid an outrageous amount for her basket, making her blush and everyone else laugh. There were rides into the high country where the air was cooler and the views stretched for what seemed like forever. There were quiet evenings in her sitting room, reading to each other or simply talking, learning the small details that make up a life, a person, a shared future. They talked about everything. His dreams for the ranch, expanding the herd, maybe breeding horses more seriously. Her ideas for the shop, teaching sewing classes, perhaps even designing original dresses rather than just copying patterns from the East. They talked about children, both agreeing they wanted them, though perhaps not right away, time to be just the two of them first. They talked about the challenges of ranch life, the hard winters, the unpredictability of cattle prices, the constant work that never truly ended. "It is not an easy life," Caleb warned her one evening. There will be times when money is tight, when the weather does not cooperate, when everything seems to go wrong at once. I am not afraid of hard work, Delilah said, and I would rather face difficulties with you than have comfort without you. As September approached and summer drew toward its close, Delilah found herself once again facing the question of staying or leaving. She had kept the shop, yes, but she had not committed beyond that. She could still sell, still return to Philadelphia, still choose the safe, predictable path. But she did not want to. The first day of September arrived cool and clear, the morning air carrying a hint of the autumn to come. Delilah woke in her apartment and dressed with unusual care, though she had no particular reason to do so. The shop would be closed today, it being Sunday, and she had planned to attend church services and perhaps take a walk afterward. A knock at her door surprised her. When she opened it, Caleb stood there in his best suit, holding a bouquet of late summer wildflowers, his expression nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Good morning," she said, confused. "I thought we were meeting after church." "I could not wait," he said simply. "May I come in?" She stepped back and he entered, setting the flowers on her table. He took off his hat and turned to face her, and she saw that his hands were trembling slightly. "Caleb, what is wrong?" "Nothing is wrong," he said. "Everything is terrifyingly right, and I find that I cannot wait another moment to ask you something I have been planning to ask for weeks now." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath stopped entirely. "Delilah Morrison," he said, dropping to one knee. "I love you more than I thought it possible to love another person. You have brought light and laughter and purpose into my life in ways I never imagined. I know you said you would stay through summer, and summer is ending, but I am asking you to stay through every season for the rest of our lives." He opened the box, revealing a simple gold band set with a single small diamond that caught the morning light. "Will you marry me?" Tears blurred her vision as she looked down at him, at this good, honest, loving man who had entered her life so unexpectedly and changed everything. There was no hesitation in her heart, no doubt, no fear, only absolute certainty. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking on the word. "Yes, Caleb, I will marry you." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, and she was kissing him back, and somewhere in the back of her mind, she thought that she should probably be more circumspect, more proper. But she did not care because she was engaged to be married to the man she loved, and propriety could wait. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, he said, "I realize I am asking you to stay through fall now, since we will need time to plan a wedding, and I would very much like to be married before winter if that suits you." "That suits me perfectly," she said, looking at the ring on her finger at the way the diamond sparkled. "Where did you get this? It is beautiful." "It was my grandmother's," he said softly. "The only piece of jewelry my mother brought west with her. I had been saving it for when I found the right woman. I found her the day she stepped off the train in March, though it took me some time to convince her to stay." They went to church together that morning, and when they shared their news afterward, the congregation erupted in congratulations and well wishes. Clara Henderson hugged Delilah so tightly she could barely breathe, and Elizabeth Warren immediately began planning a wedding shower. "October would be lovely for a wedding," Ruth Palmer said thoughtfully. "After the harvest but before the weather turns truly cold, the leaves will be changing, everything golden." And so it was decided. They would marry in October, when fall painted the mountains in amber and crimson, when the air turned crisp, and the first hints of winter whispered in the wind. September passed in a flurry of preparations. Delilah worked on her wedding dress in whatever spare moments she could find, creating something that was both elegant and practical, suitable for a ranch wife, but beautiful enough for the most important day of her life. She chose cream-colored silk that she had ordered specially from Denver, with lace at the collar and cuffs that she stitched by hand in the evenings. Caleb spent his days preparing the ranch house for her arrival, hiring a woman from town to help him clean thoroughly, making small repairs, building a new wardrobe in the bedroom for her clothes. His men helped him construct a chicken coop as a wedding present, knowing that Delilah had mentioned wanting to keep hens for eggs. They saw each other almost daily, but always in the presence of others, maintaining propriety as the wedding approached. It was both sweet torture and thrilling anticipation. The waiting, knowing that soon they would not have to say goodbye at the end of each evening, that they would share a home and a life and a future. Letters came from Philadelphia, some congratulatory, some expressing concern about her decision to marry a Western rancher and remain so far from family. Her mother wrote that she wished Delilah would reconsider, come home, marry someone suitable from their social circle. Her father's letter was more understanding, saying that he trusted her judgment and wished her happiness, though he regretted they would not see her as often. Delilah wrote back, trying to explain what she had found here, but she knew words on paper could not capture the vastness of the sky, the way the mountains made her feel both small and infinite, the sense of building something real and lasting with her own hands. She invited them to visit, to see for themselves, but doubted they would make the journey. The second week of September brought the first real frost, and with it, the knowledge that summer had truly ended and fall had begun in earnest. The aspen trees on the mountainsides turned gold seemingly overnight, great swaths of brilliant color against the dark green of the pines. Caleb took her riding into the high country to see the aspens up close. They dismounted and walked among the trees, the leaves whispering and shimmering in the breeze, carpeting the ground in gold. The air smelled of earth and the faint spice of decaying leaves, and overhead, a hawk circled on thermal currents, its cry echoing through the valley. "I want to remember this," Delilah said, turning in a slow circle, trying to take it all in. This moment, this beauty, this feeling of absolute rightness. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "Every fall for the rest of our lives I will bring you here," he promised, "so you can remember, and so we can make new memories to add to this one." She leaned into him, feeling his warmth, his strength, the steady beat of his heart against her back. "I cannot believe I almost left," she whispered. "I almost missed all of this." "But you did not," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You stayed. You gave us a chance." "You begged me to stay," she reminded him with a smile. "And I would do it again," he said. "Through every season, for as long as you would listen." The preparations for the wedding intensified as October approached. The church ladies organized themselves with military precision, assigning tasks and coordinating efforts. There would be a ceremony at the church followed by a reception in the community hall, with food and dancing and celebration. Delilah finished her dress and hung it carefully in the wardrobe, covering it with muslin to keep it clean. She had sewn a new suit for Caleb as well, dark gray wool that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, with a vest she had embroidered subtly with a pattern of horses along the hem. When she gave it to him, 2 weeks before the wedding, his eyes grew suspiciously bright. "You made this for me." "Who else would I make it for?" she teased, but she was touched by his reaction. "Try it on. I need to make sure the fit is perfect." He changed in her back room, and when he emerged, she had to catch her breath. He looked magnificent, the suit transforming him from cowboy to gentleman without erasing any of the essential qualities that made him who he was. "How do I look?" he asked, almost shy. "Like the man I am going to marry," she said softly. like the man I love." The night before the wedding, as tradition dictated, they spent apart. Delilah stayed in her apartment above the shop, surrounded by her female friends who had insisted on keeping her company. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and advice and laughter, and despite the butterflies in her stomach, Delilah felt profoundly happy. "You are doing the right thing," Clara Henderson said firmly, as if sensing Delilah's slight nervousness. "Caleb is a good man, and you two are well matched. I have seen enough marriages to know when two people fit together properly." "I know," Delilah said, twisting the ring on her finger, a habit she had developed over the past weeks. "I am not nervous about marrying him. I am nervous about being a good wife, about living up to what he deserves." "Just love him," Elizabeth Warren said simply. "The rest will follow. It is not always easy, mind you, but if you have love as your foundation, you can weather anything." The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect October days that seemed designed specifically for celebration. The sky was a deep, endless blue, and the sun painted everything in warm gold light. Delilah woke early, too excited to sleep, and stood at her window watching the town come to life. Today she would marry Caleb Rowland. Today she would promise to stay through every season for the rest of her life. The thought filled her with joy so intense it was almost painful. Her friends arrived to help her dress, and she put on the gown she had made with such care. It fit perfectly, the silk draping elegantly, the lace soft against her skin. Clara arranged her hair, pinning it up with combs that had belonged to Delilah's Aunt Margaret, something old to honor the woman who had unknowingly brought her to this place, this moment, this man. "You look beautiful," Ruth said, her eyes misty. "Absolutely beautiful." They walked to the church together, a small procession through the streets of Montrose. People came out of shops and homes to watch, calling out congratulations and good wishes. The church was full when they arrived, every pew packed with townspeople who had come to witness the marriage. And there, at the front, stood Caleb, looking at her with such love and wonder that her eyes filled with tears. She walked down the aisle toward him, toward her future, and when she took his hand, it felt like coming home. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They spoke their vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor each other through all the seasons of their lives, through joy and sorrow, plenty and want, sickness and health. The preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and when Caleb kissed her, the congregation erupted in applause and cheers. They walked back down the aisle together, married, and Delilah felt as if her heart might burst from happiness. Outside the church, people threw rice and flower petals, and someone had decorated Caleb's wagon with ribbons and tin cans that rattled merrily as they drove to the community hall for the reception. The celebration lasted well into the evening. There was food in abundance, dishes brought by every family in attendance, and the tables groaned under the weight of it all. There was music and dancing, and Delilah danced until her feet ached, first with Caleb, then with various townsmen while Caleb danced with their wives, the community coming together to celebrate the union. As the sun set and lanterns were lit, Caleb pulled her aside. "Are you ready to go home, Mrs. Rowland?" Mrs. Rowland. Her new name, her new identity, and it fit like it had always been hers. "Yes," she said. "I am ready." They said their goodbyes and thanks, and then they were in the wagon, driving away from the lights and music toward the ranch. The moon was rising, nearly full, painting the landscape in silver light. Delilah leaned against her husband, feeling his arm around her shoulders, and thought about how much had changed since that morning in March when she had stepped off the train. She had come to Montrose planning to stay only through spring, to quickly settle her aunt's affairs and return to her old life. But Caleb had begged her to stay through summer, and then through fall, and she had stayed because somewhere along the way, his life had become her life. His home had become her home. His dreams had woven themselves into her own. The ranch house glowed with lamplight as they approached. Caleb had left lights burning to welcome them home, and the sight of it made Delilah's throat tight with emotion. He helped her down from the wagon and then, to her surprise, swept her up into his arms. "I have been told this is traditional," he said with a grin, carrying her toward the door. "I believe you are supposed to carry me over the threshold," she said, laughing, her arms around his neck. "Then I shall do exactly that." He carried her into the house and set her gently on her feet in the parlor. For a moment they just stood looking at each other, the weight and wonder of the day settling around them. "Hello, wife," he said softly. "Hello, husband," she replied, and then he was kissing her and she was kissing him back, and there was no more need for words. They spent their first days of marriage learning the rhythms of living together, the small adjustments and compromises that turned two separate people into a partnership. Delilah continued to run her shop in town, riding in most mornings and returning to the ranch in the evenings. Caleb worked his land and his cattle, but he always made time to meet her when she arrived home, to help her down from the wagon and hear about her day. The nights grew longer and colder as October progressed into November. Delilah learned to love the evenings at the ranch, the way Caleb would read to her while she sewed by lamplight, or how they would sit on the porch wrapped in blankets, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky, bright and close in the thin mountain air. "Will you ask me to stay through winter too?" she asked one evening, teasing him. He pulled her closer against his side. "I am asking you to stay through every winter for the rest of our lives," he said seriously. "Though I know winter here can be harsh. The snow gets deep, the temperatures drop well below freezing, and sometimes we can be snowed in for days at a time." "That does not sound entirely terrible," she said, thinking of being warm inside with him while snow fell outside. "Besides, I have already stayed through spring and summer and fall. I might as well see what winter brings." November brought the first real snow, fat flakes that fell steadily for 2 days, blanketing the valley in white. Delilah found herself enchanted by it, the way it transformed the landscape into something magical and pristine. She and Caleb walked out into it, their breath clouding in the cold air, and she tilted her face up to feel the snowflakes melt against her skin. "It is beautiful," she said. "It is work," Caleb said, but he was smiling. "The cattle need hay now, and we have to make sure they have access to water despite the freezing temperatures. The horses need extra care. Firewood has to be split and stacked. Winter is not just pretty snowfall, Delilah. It is hard, constant labor." "Then teach me," she said simply. "Teach me what needs to be done, and I will help." And he did. She learned to help feed the cattle, tossing hay from the back of the wagon while Caleb drove the team. She learned to break ice from the water troughs and to recognize signs of distress in the animals. She learned to split kindling and bank the fire so it would burn slowly through the night, keeping the house warm until morning. It was hard work, but there was satisfaction in it, in the knowledge that she was contributing, that she was becoming a true partner in this life they were building together. December arrived with bitter cold and more snow. The shop in town closed for weeks at a time when the weather made travel impossible, but Delilah did not mind. She worked on projects at home, creating warm quilts and mending clothes for Caleb and his men, learning to cook hearty meals on the wood stove that would sustain them through the cold and the labor. Christmas came quietly, just the two of them snowed in at the ranch. Caleb gave her a beautiful saddle made specifically for her, tooled with a pattern of flowers and her initials. She gave him a warm coat she had sewn lined with sheep's wool, and a new pair of gloves. They spent the day together in the warm house, cooking a special meal and talking about everything and nothing, and Delilah thought she had never been happier. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it, this partnership, this love, this sense of building something real and lasting. As the year turned and January arrived with its fierce cold and short days, Delilah realized something that made her heart race. She had missed her monthly courses twice now, and there were other signs too, a tenderness in her breasts, a slight queasiness in the mornings that faded by midday. She waited another week to be certain, and then one evening as they sat by the fire, she told Caleb, "I think I am with child." He went very still, the book he had been reading forgotten in his lap. "You think?" His voice was rough with emotion. "I am fairly certain," she said, suddenly nervous about his reaction. "I know we said we wanted to wait, but she did not get to finish because he had pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "We are going to have a baby." "You are pleased?" she asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Pleased." He pulled back to look at her, and she saw tears on his cheeks. "Delilah, I am beyond pleased. I am overjoyed. I am terrified. I am grateful beyond words." She laughed and cried at the same time, and they held each other as the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, safe and warm and together. Winter held the land in its grip through January and February, but Delilah did not mind. She was content at the ranch, watching the subtle changes in her body as the baby grew, planning for the future, dreaming about the child who would arrive in late summer or early fall. They told no one yet, wanting to keep the secret to themselves for a while longer, this precious knowledge shared only between them. But Delilah caught Caleb looking at her sometimes with such tenderness that it made her breath catch, and she knew that he was thinking about the life growing inside her, the family they were creating. March arrived, marking a full year since Delilah had stepped off the train in Montrose. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the first hints of green appeared in sheltered spots where the sun hit strongest. The days grew longer, warmer, and the world began its slow emergence from winter's grip. "Spring is coming again," Caleb said one morning, standing at the window and looking out over the valley. A full year has passed. Delilah came to stand beside him, fitting herself under his arm. Her belly was beginning to show now, a small but definite swell that filled them both with wonder and anticipation. "I was supposed to leave after spring," she said softly. "That was my plan." "I remember," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I begged you to stay through summer. And then through fall. And through winter. And now spring is coming again," she said, placing her hand over the place where their child grew. "And I am still here." "Will you stay through this spring too?" he asked, the question ritual now, a callback to those early uncertain days. "Through this spring and every spring," she promised. "Through every season for the rest of our lives. You no longer have to beg, Caleb. This is my home now. You are my home." He turned her in his arms and kissed her deeply, and she tasted salt and knew he was crying. But she was crying too, overwhelmed by the knowledge of how much had changed, how much she had gained by staying, by taking a chance on this place and this man. April brought the true thaw, and with it, Delilah returned to her shop in town several days a week. Word of her pregnancy had spread, and her customers were delighted, bringing her gifts of baby clothes and offering advice both welcome and overwhelming. She took it all with grace, understanding that this was the community welcoming not just her child but her, accepting her fully as one of their own. Clara Henderson helped her set up a cradle in the ranch house, a beautiful piece that her own children had used. Elizabeth Warren gave her a baby quilt she had made, stitched with care in soft colors that would suit either a boy or a girl. Ruth Palmer promised to be available when the baby came, her experience with birthing helpful to a first-time mother. May arrived with its explosion of wildflowers, and Delilah walked through the meadows near the ranch, picking bouquets to bring inside, delighting in the colors and scents of spring. Her belly was growing steadily now, and she had to let out her dresses and sew new ones to accommodate her changing shape. Caleb was endlessly solicitous, worrying about her overworking, making sure she rested, his hand finding her belly constantly to feel the baby move. The first time he felt a kick, his face had transformed with such joy that Delilah had laughed and cried at the same time. "There is really a baby in there," he had said wonderingly. "Where did you think it was?" she had teased. "I knew, but feeling it move makes it real in a different way." June brought the anniversary of their engagement, and Caleb took her on a picnic to the same meadow where they had sheltered from the storm a year ago. The lined shack still stood, weathered but intact, and they sat outside it on a blanket, eating the lunch she had packed and remembering. "I loved you even then," Caleb admitted. "I think I loved you from the moment you examined my torn shirt with such concentration, determined to do the repair perfectly." "I loved you when you danced with me at the spring social," Delilah said. "The way you held me, like I was precious. No one had ever made me feel that way before." They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds build over the mountains, and Delilah thought about how they had weathered their first year together. There had been challenges, certainly. Learning to live with another person, to compromise and communicate, was not always easy. There had been disagreements about money, about how much time she should spend at the shop, about preparations for the baby. But they had worked through each difficulty together, talking and listening and finding solutions that honored both their needs. And the challenges had been far outweighed by the joys. The quiet mornings waking up beside him, the pride she felt watching him work with the horses, the way he supported her business and her independence, the laughter and the love that filled their home. July brought intense heat again, and Delilah found herself moving more slowly, her belly large now, the baby active inside her. She stopped going into town as often, finding the ride increasingly uncomfortable, and instead worked on sewing projects at home, making final preparations for the baby's arrival. Caleb hired a woman from town to come help with housework and cooking, despite Delilah's protests that she could manage. "You are growing our child," he said firmly. "Let someone else scrub floors and haul water." She appreciated the help more than she wanted to admit, especially as August arrived and she grew more tired, her ankles swelling in the heat, her back aching from carrying the extra weight. The baby was due in late August or early September, according to Ruth Palmer's best guess, and as the time approached, Delilah felt a mixture of anticipation and nervousness. She wanted to meet this child they had created, but she was also aware of the dangers of childbirth, the very real possibility that things could go wrong. Caleb seemed to sense her anxiety. "You will be fine," he told her repeatedly. "You are strong and healthy. Ruth has delivered dozens of babies. Everything will be fine." "You cannot know that," she said. "No," he admitted, "but I have faith. In you, in Ruth, in the fact that we are meant to raise this child together." The pain started on a late August morning, subtle at first, like a tightening across her belly that came and went. Delilah had been expecting them, had been told what to watch for, but the reality was different than the description. This was her body preparing to bring a new life into the world, and it was both terrifying and miraculous. She told Caleb, who immediately sent one of his men to fetch Ruth Palmer. Then he helped Delilah to their bedroom and stayed with her, holding her hand through the contractions that came stronger and closer together, as the day progressed. Ruth arrived by mid-afternoon and took charge with the calm competence of experience. She examined Delilah and pronounced everything progressing normally, then settled in to wait, coaching her through the pains, encouraging her to walk and rest and breathe. Caleb stayed by her side through it all, despite Ruth suggesting he might want to wait elsewhere as was customary for men. "I am staying," he said flatly. "She is my wife. This is my child. I am staying." And he did, his presence a comfort even when the pains grew so intense that Delilah was sure she could not endure another moment. He wiped her face with cool cloths, let her squeeze his hand until she was certain she was breaking his bones, whispered encouragements and declarations of love. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose when Ruth finally said, "It is time to push." What followed was the hardest work Delilah had ever done, harder than anything she had imagined. But with Caleb's voice in her ear and Ruth's steady guidance, she pushed when told to push, rested when told to rest, and finally, as the last light faded from the sky, she heard the sharp, insistent cry of a newborn baby. "A boy," Ruth announced, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son." Delilah collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted beyond measure but filled with overwhelming relief and joy. Ruth cleaned the baby quickly and efficiently, then placed him on Delilah's chest, and she looked down at the tiny, red, wrinkled face of her son and fell instantly, completely in love. Caleb was crying openly, unashamed as he looked at his child. "A son," he said wonderingly. "We have a son." The baby had a shock of dark hair and gray eyes that would likely change color in time. His fingers were impossibly small, his fingernails like tiny shells, and when Delilah touched his hand, he wrapped his fingers around hers with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "He needs a name," Ruth said gently, after a few minutes of letting them simply marvel at the new life they had created. Delilah looked at Caleb. They had discussed names but had not made a final decision, wanting to see the baby first. "What do you think?" she asked. "Thomas," Caleb said softly. "After my father. Thomas Matthew Rowland, if that suits you." "Thomas Matthew Rowland," Delilah repeated, testing the sound of it. "Tommy. Yes, that suits him perfectly." Ruth stayed through the night, making sure both mother and baby were doing well, teaching Delilah how to nurse the hungry infant. By morning, when she finally left, promising to return the next day to check on them, Delilah and Caleb were alone with their son for the first time. They lay in bed together, Tommy between them, just watching him sleep. His breathing was so quiet, his chest rising and falling in tiny movements, and Delilah found herself checking constantly to make sure he was still all right. "I am terrified," she admitted to Caleb. "He is so small, so fragile. What if I do something wrong?" "Then we will learn from it and do better next time," Caleb said. "We are in this together, Delilah. We will figure it out as we go, just like we have figured out everything else." September arrived with cooler temperatures, and the first hints that summer was releasing its hold on the land. Delilah spent most of her time in the house with Tommy, nursing him, changing him, marveling at every tiny change and development. "He was a good baby," Ruth said, sleeping for long stretches and nursing well, already gaining weight and growing strong. Caleb was a devoted father, helping with everything despite the traditional division of labor that said childcare was women's work. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor with Tommy when he was fussy, sat beside Delilah during night feedings just to keep her company. "I do not want to miss anything," he explained when she suggested he get more sleep. "He will only be this small once." Friends and neighbors came to visit, bringing gifts and meals and congratulations. The community that had welcomed Delilah now welcomed her son, and she felt the bonds that tied her to this place, these people, growing stronger and deeper. October arrived, painting the mountains in gold and red once more. Delilah and Caleb celebrated their first anniversary quietly at home, unwilling to leave Tommy with anyone else yet. They exchanged gifts and reminisced about their wedding day, and Delilah thought about how much had changed in just 1 year. She had been married, established herself fully in the community, become a mother. The shop continued to run successfully, though she had hired a young woman to help mind it several days a week so she could stay home with Tommy. The ranch was doing well, Caleb's careful management paying off in healthy cattle and good foals from his breeding program. "Next year we can have a bigger celebration," Caleb said, holding Tommy so Delilah could eat her dinner with both hands. "Maybe host a party here at the ranch." "I would like that," Delilah said. "Though honestly, this is perfect, just the three of us." November brought snow again, and the cycle of winter work began anew. But this winter was different from the last, filled with the sounds of a baby's cries and coos, with the responsibility and joy of caring for their son. Tommy was growing rapidly, becoming more alert, beginning to smile and respond to their voices. Delilah found that she loved being a mother in ways she had not anticipated. Yes, it was exhausting, the broken sleep and constant demands, but it was also deeply fulfilling. Watching Tommy discover his own hands, hearing his delighted laughter when Caleb tickled him, seeing bits of herself and Caleb in his expressions, all of it filled her with profound contentment. December brought Christmas again, and this year they had family staying with them. Delilah's parents had finally made the journey west, wanting to meet their grandson, and they stayed for 2 weeks. Her mother fussed over Tommy endlessly, and her father spent long hours talking with Caleb about the ranch, coming to understand and respect the life his daughter had chosen. "I worried about you out here," her mother admitted one evening as they sat together near the fire, Tommy asleep in Delilah's arms. "So far from everything familiar, but I can see you are happy. This place suits you in ways Philadelphia never did." "I did not know it until I came here," Delilah said. "But yes, this is where I belong." After her parents left, promising to visit again next year, Delilah and Caleb settled back into their routines. January and February passed in a blur of cold and snow and the simple rhythms of ranch life. Tommy continued to grow and thrive, learning to sit up, then to crawl, exploring his world with fearless curiosity. March arrived again, marking 2 full years since Delilah had arrived in Montrose. She stood at the window of the ranch house, Tommy on her hip, watching the snow melt and the first green shoots of grass emerge from the brown earth. Caleb came up behind her and wrapped his arms around both of them. 2 years, he said. 2 years, she agreed. "I was supposed to leave after spring. That was the plan." "I am very glad you changed your plan," he said, kissing her cheek. "I cannot imagine my life without you, without either of you." Tommy babbled happily, reaching for Caleb's face, and Caleb took him, tossing him gently in the air and catching him, making the baby shriek with laughter. Delilah watched them, her heart full to bursting. She had come to Montrose planning to stay only briefly, to settle her aunt's affairs and return to her old life. But Caleb had begged her to stay through summer, and then through fall, and then through winter, and she had stayed because she had fallen in love with him, with this place, with the life they were building together. And now, 2 years later, she could not imagine being anywhere else. This was her home. These were her people. This was her family. She had stayed through every season and would continue to stay through all the seasons yet to come, through springs and summers and falls and winters, through all the years of her life. Spring unfolded in its glory, the the valley coming alive with new growth and baby animals. Tommy took his first steps in late April, lurching between Delilah and Caleb with determination, falling and getting back up, finally mastering the skill of walking. By May, he was running everywhere into everything, a constant source of joy and exhaustion. Delilah returned to working at the shop more regularly, bringing Tommy with her. She set up a play area in the back room where he could occupy himself while she worked, and her customers delighted in watching him grow. The young woman she had hired, a girl named Sarah with a good eye for detail, proved invaluable, allowing Delilah to balance her business with motherhood. Summer brought its heat and work, but also long, sweet evenings when they would sit on the porch as a family, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Tommy would play in the grass, chasing the ranch dogs, and Delilah would lean against Caleb's shoulder, feeling peace settle over her like a blanket. "You want more children?" Caleb asked one evening. Delilah considered the question. "Yes," she said finally. "Not right away, perhaps. But yes, I would like Tommy to have brothers and sisters." "I would like that too," Caleb said. "A house full of children, noise and laughter and life." Fall arrived with its golden aspens and crisp air, and Delilah found herself pregnant again. They told no one at first, savoring the secret, but by October it was becoming obvious and they shared their news. The town celebrated with them, and Delilah felt again the warmth of community, the knowledge that she and her family were valued and loved here. Their second anniversary passed with a party at the ranch, friends and neighbors gathering to celebrate with food and music and dancing. Tommy toddled among the guests, charming everyone with his smiles and babbling attempts at speech. Delilah danced with Caleb as the sun set, moving more carefully now because of the baby, but filled with happiness. "Thank you for begging me to stay," she said as they swayed to the music. "Thank you for listening," he replied, "for giving us a chance." Winter came again, the third since Delilah's arrival, and this time she faced it with confidence and experience. She knew what to expect, knew how to prepare, knew that they would make it through to spring as they always did. Tommy loved the snow, playing in it for hours despite the cold, building lopsided snowmen with Caleb's help. The baby was due in late April or early May, and as the time approached, Delilah felt calm rather than nervous. She had done this before, knew what was coming, trusted in her body's ability to do this work. Ruth Palmer would be there again, and Caleb would hold her hand, and soon they would have another child to love. This time, the labor was shorter but more intense. Delilah woke in the pre-dawn darkness with contractions already closed together, and by the time Ruth arrived, things were progressing quickly. Tommy was staying with Clara Henderson for the day, leaving Delilah free to focus entirely on the work of birthing. By mid-morning, as spring sunshine streamed through the bedroom windows, their second son was born. He came out crying lustily, his face red with indignation, and Ruth laughed as she placed him on Delilah's chest. "This one has opinions already," she said. He was bigger than Tommy had been, with a full head of light brown hair. His eyes, when he opened them, were blue, and his grip was even stronger than his brother's had been. "Another son," Caleb said, his voice thick with emotion. "2 sons. What shall we name him?" Delilah asked, stroking the baby's soft hair. They had discussed it, but again they had waited to decide until they met the child. "James," Caleb said. "After your father, James William Rowland." Delilah smiled, touched that he wanted to honor her family. "James William Rowland, Jimmy." "Yes, that is perfect." When Tommy came home that afternoon to meet his brother, he was fascinated, touching the baby's tiny hands with wonder, saying "baby" over and over. Delilah watched her two sons together and felt her heart expand to make room for this new love, this new life. The years that followed were full and rich. Tommy and Jimmy grew, close as brothers despite the occasional squabble, exploring the ranch and learning from their father. Delilah continued to run her shop, finding satisfaction in the work and in providing a service to the community. The business thrived, and she eventually expanded, adding ready-made clothing alongside the custom work and alterations. Caleb's ranch prospered too. His reputation for quality horses spread, and he began selling breeding stock to ranchers across Colorado and beyond. He took on more hands, built new barns and corrals, expanded his grazing land. The Broken Creek Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the region. In the spring of their 5th year together, Delilah gave birth to a daughter. They named her Margaret, after Delilah's aunt, the woman whose legacy had brought Delilah to Montrose in the first place. She was a beautiful baby, with dark hair like her mother and her father's gray eyes, and her brothers adored her from the moment they met her. Life settled into a rhythm, the seasons turning, each bringing its own work and joys. Springs were for calving and planting. Summers were for long days of work and longer evenings of play. Falls were for gathering the harvest and preparing for winter. Winters were for close family time, gathered around the fire while wind and snow raged outside. Tommy grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved books and horses in equal measure. Jimmy was more adventurous, always pushing boundaries, climbing higher and riding faster than his parents liked. Margaret was determined and independent, refusing help even when she clearly needed it, insisting on doing everything herself. Delilah watched her children grow and marveled at how much her life had changed. Sometimes she thought about the woman she had been when she arrived in Montrose, alone and uncertain, planning to stay only briefly. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different life entirely. One spring evening, as the aspen trees turned gold on the mountains, and the air carried the first hint of winter's approach, Delilah and Caleb sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Tommy was 10 now, Jimmy 8, and Margaret 5, and they were building something elaborate with sticks and rope and pure imagination. "You ever regret it?" Caleb asked quietly. "Staying, giving up the life you could have had in Philadelphia?" Delilah turned to look at him. This man she had loved for over a decade now, the father of her children, her partner in all things. His hair was starting to gray at the temples, and there were lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him in her shop with his torn shirt. "Not for a single moment," she said honestly. "This is the life I was meant to have. I just did not know it until you begged me to stay." He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers in the gesture that had become so familiar, so comfortable. "I would beg you again every day if necessary." "You do not have to beg any more," she said, squeezing his hand. "I am not going anywhere. This is my home. You are my home. Through every season for the rest of my life." As the sun set behind the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, their children's laughter echoing in the evening air, Delilah felt a profound sense of gratitude and peace. She had come to Montrose planning to leave after spring, but love had convinced her to stay through summer, through fall, through winter, through all the seasons that followed, and it had been the best decision of her life. The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and the growing of their children. Tommy showed an aptitude for the business side of ranching, keeping careful records of expenses and income even as a young teenager. Jimmy excelled with horses, gentling even the wildest mustangs with patience and intuition. Margaret learned to sew from her mother, her stitches becoming as fine and even as Delilah's own. When Tommy was 16, he began talking about college, about studying business and agriculture. Delilah and Caleb encouraged him, even though it meant he would leave the ranch for a time. They had always known their children would grow up and make their own choices, forge their own paths. Jimmy, at 14, declared he wanted to stay on the ranch forever, to work alongside his father and eventually take over the operation. Caleb was pleased, but insisted he finish his schooling first, learn to read and write and calculate well enough to manage a business. Margaret, at 11, was still exploring who she wanted to become. She loved sewing but also loved riding. She read voraciously but also spent hours outdoors observing birds and plants and weather patterns. She was, Caleb said with a mixture of pride and exasperation, very much her own person. On their 10th anniversary, Delilah and Caleb took a trip together, just the two of them, leaving the children with Clara Henderson and Elizabeth Warren. They rode into the high country, to the places where Caleb had first shown her the beauty of the Colorado wilderness, and they spent 3 days camping under the stars, talking and remembering and simply being together without the demands of family and business. 10 years, Delilah said, lying beside Caleb under a sky so full of stars it seemed impossible. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that you walked into my shop with that torn shirt. Sometimes it feels like we have been together forever. Both are true, I think, Caleb said. Time is strange that way. Do you remember begging me to stay? She asked, smiling in the darkness. I remember being terrified you would say no, he admitted. I remember thinking that if you left, I would lose something precious I had only just found. I almost did leave, she said quietly. After spring ended, I seriously considered selling the shop and returning to Philadelphia. It would have been the safe choice, the expected choice. What changed your mind? He asked, though they had discussed this before. You, she said simply. The way you looked at me. The way you saw me not as someone to change or mold, but as someone complete in myself. The way you asked me to stay rather than demanding it. You gave me a choice, and that made all the difference. He rolled onto his side and pulled her close, and she felt his heartbeat against her cheek, steady and strong. I will never stop being grateful that you chose to stay. They returned to the ranch refreshed, ready to face whatever came next. And what came was both joy and challenge, as life always brings both. Jimmy broke his leg badly when he was 15, thrown from a green horse he had been too confident about riding. He spent months healing, frustrated and restless, learning patience the hard way. Delilah sat with him for hours, reading to him, talking with him, helping him understand that setbacks were part of life, that how you responded to difficulty defined you more than the difficulty itself. Margaret, at 12, announced she wanted to study medicine, inspired by watching Ruth Palmer care for her brother during his recovery. It was an unusual ambition for a girl, but Delilah and Caleb supported her, finding books and resources, encouraging her natural curiosity about how the body worked. Tommy left for college in Denver when he was 17, and the house felt emptier without his steady presence. But he came home for holidays and summers, bringing with him new ideas and information, helping his father implement more efficient record-keeping systems and marketing strategies. Through it all, Delilah's shop continued to thrive. She had trained Sarah so well that the younger woman could run things for days at a time, allowing Delilah to focus on design work and special commissions. Women from as far away as Gunnison and Durango ordered dresses from Morrison's fine dresses, and Delilah took pride in the reputation she had built. The town of Montrose grew too, adding new businesses and families, expanding its boundaries. The railroad line improved, making travel easier, bringing more goods and people west. But the core of the community remained the same: people who looked out for each other, who helped in times of trouble and celebrated in times of joy. Delilah's parents visited several more times over the years, becoming more comfortable with the West each visit, eventually selling their Philadelphia home and moving to Denver to be closer to their daughter and grandchildren. Her father became an investor in Caleb's ranch, providing capital for expansion in exchange for a share of profits, a partnership that benefited both families. On their 15th anniversary, Delilah and Caleb renewed their vows in the same church where they had married, surrounded by their children, now nearly grown, and the community that had witnessed and supported their marriage from the beginning. It was a simple ceremony but profound, a recommitment to the promises they had made and kept for a decade and a half. That night, lying in bed in the ranch house that had become so thoroughly their home, Caleb said, "I would do it all again, exactly the same way. Even the hard parts." Delilah asked, "Especially the hard parts," he said. "They taught us how to weather storms together. They made us stronger." Delilah thought about the challenges they had faced, the harsh winters, the year the cattle prices dropped so low they almost lost money, Jimmy's injury, the normal conflicts of marriage, the disagreements and misunderstandings that any two people living together must navigate. They had come through all of it, not unscathed perhaps, but intact, their love deeper and more resilient for having been tested. "I love you," she said. "More now than the day we married." "And I love you," he replied, "more with every passing season." The children grew and eventually left to pursue their own dreams. Tommy graduated from college and took a position with a large ranching consortium in Wyoming, though he promised to return eventually to run the family ranch. Jimmy stayed on the Broken Creek Ranch, becoming Caleb's full partner in the operation, marrying a local girl named Emma who fit into the family as if she had always been there. Margaret, true to her word, studied medicine. She had to leave Colorado to do it, traveling to a women's medical college in the East, but she returned after completing her training and set up practice in Montrose, becoming the town's first female doctor. The older physicians were skeptical at first, but her skill and dedication quickly won them over, and patients began requesting her specifically. As Delilah and Caleb moved into their later years, they found new rhythms. The ranch ran itself now, with Jimmy managing the day-to-day operations. The shop had been sold to Sarah, who had proven herself more than capable. Delilah still designed occasionally, but mostly she enjoyed the freedom to pursue other interests, to travel with Caleb, to spend time with the grandchildren who began arriving as their children married and started families of their own. One spring morning, nearly 25 years after Delilah had first arrived in Montrose, she and Caleb stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of pink and gold. They were older now, their hair gray, their bodies bearing the marks of hard work and time, but they still held hands as they watched the day begin. 25 years, Delilah said softly. A quarter of a century since you begged me to stay. The best 25 years of my life, Caleb said. Every season with you has been a gift. Delilah leaned against him, feeling his solid warmth, and thought about all the seasons they had shared. Springs full of new life and hope. Summers of hard work and long, sweet evenings. Falls of harvest and preparation. Winters of close togetherness and simple survival. They had weathered them all together, had built a life and a family and a legacy. I was supposed to leave after spring, she said, as she had said so many times over the years. That was the plan. I know, Caleb said, as he always did. But I begged you to stay. Through every season, she finished, the words ritual now, a story they told themselves, a reminder of how their life together had begun. Below them, the ranch was waking up. Smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney. Cattle moved slowly toward the creek for their morning drink. Horses whinnied in the corrals, eager for their breakfast. It was a working ranch still, alive and productive, a testament to the vision and hard work of multiple generations. In town, Morrison's fine dresses would be opening soon, Sarah arriving to unlock the doors and prepare for the day's business. The shop Delilah had inherited from her Aunt Margaret had outlasted them both, becoming an institution in Montrose, a place where women came not just for clothes but for community and connection. The church where they had married and renewed their vows would welcome parishioners for Sunday service. The school where their children had learned would educate a new generation. The bank where Caleb had needed a good shirt for a meeting so many years ago still stood on Main Street, and the community hall where they had danced at their wedding still hosted celebrations. All of it was home. All of it was theirs, not in the sense of ownership but in the sense of belonging, of being woven into the fabric of a place, and its people so thoroughly that separation was unthinkable. A rider approached, and as he drew closer, Delilah recognized Tommy, home for a visit with his wife and children. He waved as he rode up, dismounting easily despite his city job, the skills learned in youth never forgotten. "Good morning," he called. "I thought I would find you out here watching the sunrise." "Some habits do not change," Caleb said, embracing his son. Tommy's children spilled out of the wagon that followed, running to their grandparents with shrieks of joy. Delilah gathered them close, breathing in their young, alive scent, feeling her heart expand once again to accommodate more love. This was what she had stayed for, though she could not have known it that first spring. Not just Caleb, though he had been the catalyst, the one who begged her to remain. But for all of this, the family, the community, the land, the seasons turning in their eternal cycle. For the knowledge that she was part of something larger than herself, something that would continue beyond her own life. She had stayed because Caleb asked her to, yes. But she had kept staying because she had found where she belonged, had discovered that home was not a place you were born but a place you chose, day after day, season after season, year after year. As the sun climbed higher and the day fully began, Delilah looked around at her family, at the ranch spread out before them, at the mountains standing eternal in the distance, and she felt nothing but gratitude. For the telegram that had brought her here, for the aunt who had left her a legacy, for the torn shirt that had brought a handsome rancher to her door, for the courage to stay when leaving would have been easier. Most of all, for the man who had loved her enough to beg her to stay through every season, and for the life they had built together, season by season, year by year, a life more beautiful and fulfilling than anything she could have planned or imagined. She was supposed to leave after spring, but she had stayed. And in staying, she had found everything.